I love this next poem. It's quite long. I get to play my mum and dad in it. It's about childhood fears. Sort of morphs into adult fears, really, but it's mostly about my dad. All my life, Dad collected things, mostly to do with football programmes, cigarette, bubblegum, cars, magazine papers. Our house was a fire officer's nightmare. He also collected, when I was very little, he collected souvenir postcards, but in the last sort of 30 years of his life, he collected crested souvenir teaspoons. I'm now the proud owner of 3,000 crested souvenir teaspoons. He's collecting a working class thing. I don't know. Psychologists would probably have a field day with that. But even in his garden he collected. He didn't have a nice garden that was flowers all different times of year. He would do all roses. They'd all be roses, or they'd all be delphiniums. I remember that. When I was a child, dahlias. I absolutely adore dahlias. And this poem is called Dad Digging, Doctor Who, and the Dahlias. Well, and the DAH-LIAS, actually. Dad Digging, Doctor Who, and the DAH-LIAS. How does it work, this poetry law? In my case, I step into my degenerating TARDIS, which stands for Thoughts and Recollections Distilled into Story. And I'm careered back in time to another place. Better only because I'm younger, and such is the way of things, to the postcard sites, gardens of my council estate, havens among the black remembered mills of the long lost legacy of the industrial north. My father content in his garden, its dad digging, and I, like Heaney, merely mining moments from a carefree and faraway childhood. I take my pen and work the loam of memory, hopeful for the promise of enlightenment. Spring would herald the preparation of his summer spectacular. This small, squat man, Cornish built, close to the earth, dad digging in a stained shirt, not from gardening, revealing pale freckled arms and dark elbows contoured in dust. He works another soil with an age-old spade, pitted with the horticultural heritage of his homeland, cutting through the tilth with a soft plash of industry, easing the passage of growth as he breaks up the soil with his delicate, fussing fingers, more pertinent to a writer, seeding his plot and preparing the way for growth. His garden, which the rest of the year contained only remnants of a previous owner's horticultural exploits. I remember only a deep red peony and the sweet gooseberries upon which Dad would gorge as a reward for his intimate endeavour. He would dust the ground with bone meal, working in the, unbeknown to me, finely ground slaughterhouse remains, which possessed an uneasy fragrance, the pleasant lighter notes of the overpowering stench of the Burnley abattoir. The great Dutch dahlia catalogues would rattle the letterbox, and Messrs. Blom, Bakker and Geerling would, like eager parents keen to show you photos of their children, present their latest offerings in fulsome colour. No black and white here, what would be the point? I would marvel at the mauves, outstanding oranges, deep wines, the purple and white bicolours, and the salmon beiges. Weeks later, brown paper sacks, postmarked Nederland, would arrive bearing dull stamps with the silhouette of some other older queen. They'd be hurried through the house before Mum could see them. Together, Dad and I would make long, complicated bus journeys to visit nurseries in the unknown corners of West Lancashire, or go and see Mr. Barwise, the mage, a doyen among the dahlia set, hidden away in his nursery in the grounds of Townley Hall. And I would watch as my dad, always retiring and ill at ease with his perceived betters, doctors, counsellors, managers, would blossom in the company of a fellow gardening man. A few months would pass, and I, busy with playing out, fighting Japs as commando and having adventures in the lost valleys and beaten bands of my hometown, would not notice the verdant sward that began to dwarf the 1 inch by 1 inch square wooden stakes, each set out a dusty boot's width from the crown to protect it. And then it was like, wow, a detonation of colour, hemmed in by the surrounding walls of inappropriate privet. This peacock garden would become a tumescent showcase, a mating display for the benefit of the drab neighbouring gardens of lawns, lavender, lobelia and listless roses, which would for a month or so pale into insignificance. You see, Dad was more collector than gardener, not for him the geometrically perfect pom-pom too small beneath him. He liked the grandest, most showy specimens, iconoblasts of colour, and dahlias are the greatest example of floral pyrotechnics, which still delights the indolent old man I've become, but not enough for me to undertake all that necessary work. I am happy just to look and admire and gossip my memories. I recall Dad dawdling in his domain, eager to harvest the praise of those marvelling at his creations as they shortcut by on the way to the paper shop. Not a natural smiler on account of his small mouth, his eyes would squeeze tight shut with glee, and his face would morph into a beatific sculpture, Joy by Henry Moore perhaps. An extraterrestrial's first attempt at registering human delight. He would send me in to ask if Mum would like some in the house. It's DAH-LIAS, she said. That's what the Americans call them. And that for her was enough. Everyone loved the Americans then. Brought up on motion picture and film goer mag she was, despite her marriage to my economic migrant father, still carrying a torch for Errol Flynn, who wasn't American but sort of was. Why don't you want them in the house, Mum? I asked. It's the earwigs that come in with them, she said. Dad would shake the chosen blooms and we'd watch them fall out like badly burnt cornflakes from out the packet, with no plastic toy. Beauty in those beasts with their evil-looking rear end pincers. They seemed happy living in the warmth of those dahlia petals, but would be looking for another cosy home when winter came. And where better than the dark recess of the sleeping child's ear? So justify, I would return with a message to the garden. Mum says give them to Mrs. Slinger. She likes DAH-LIAS. Resigned, he would shake his sunburnt head and I'd watch in fascination to see if any earwigs cascaded from out of him. Do not feel sorry for my dad and his unrequited gift of love, a greedy gardener who only offered up his blooms when he knew they were past their peak of performance. It was all for his show, his earthly paradise in the summer months when football, his other love of his contented life, ironically hibernated. When the flowering display was over, I'd like to watch as he sliced into the earth, gauging the soil-grasping spread of his darling tubers, each one responsible for the beauty bursts of these petrified explosions and glorious sumptuous suns. He would gently lift them, brushing away the loose soil, to reveal skeletal hands that hung from a severed wrist. Dead man's fingers now engorged with the promise of resurrection. For him, each one a Proustian Madeleine, a cherished memory, lovingly wrapped in saved back copies of the Burnley Express and placed into the subconscious of the Pebble Dash coal shed. And here I invoke my own involuntary memory, seeing them nestled in the protection of redundant orange boxes as a swollen, gnarled finger protrudes from the cover, a malignant tuber, pointing out in a threat of accusation, "This is not the last you've seen of me. I will return." As a child, the winter months passed, and any trip out to the dustbin would see me make a cautious glance at the galvanised latch that was all that held fast the Odin Hill council-painted door that kept me safe from something nasty stirring in the coal shed. Even in the colour vacuum of 1960s television, in which it was first presented, the Dalek was impressive. Now, when looking back, they seem laughingly inept when, despite the ability to travel light years through space, that most basic of human creations, the staircase, would stymie them. But to my shiny, brand new imagination, they appeared awesome in the true sense of the word. Their lack of emotion, power-dressed and designed to impress. I had seen their likeness in post-war movies. They were, to all intents and purposes, our enemy, space Nazis, relentless in their quest for destruction and power. I recall the dismantling of a Dalek in fuzzy black and white, the creature within removed and cradled with undeserved care, as reverentially as some bizarre, unearthly nativity scene. The closing shot revealed a pathetic arthritic digit stretching out accusingly from beneath the folds of its swaddling clothes. Back then I couldn't shake away the resemblance as easy as my father did the troublesome earwig. looking back now to this finger of fate is just enough to trigger the idea that we all arrive in the same protective white blanket. Each mewling babe stretches out a pointing finger from a tiny hand, and one will use that finger to create the Last Supper, and another will use it to point the way to the final solution. The image still haunts me and ever will, no doubt. And just as this beauty comes back year upon year, so must evil, and it too will be swaddled in a blanket, entirely innocent and waiting to be nourished and nurtured, just waiting for those earwigs to crawl inside its head, just like the dahlias. In my early teens, I used to